The last thing I expected on a lazy Sunday afternoon was a police officer knocking on my door because my nosy neighbor Karen had declared my pool water a public safety concern. What happened next left me absolutely speechless. Karen had always been nosy, but today she was on another level. I first noticed her peering over the fence while I was skimming leaves from my pool. She stood there, arms crossed, her signature disapproving glare locked onto me like I was committing a crime. I tried to ignore her. After all, Karen had made it her life's mission to police the entire neighborhood, from mailbox heights to grass lengths. But today her focus was my pool water. She cleared her throat loudly, making sure I knew she was there. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying that authoritative tone she always used when pretending she had some sort of power. I sighed, already bracing for whatever ridiculous complaint she had now. "What's up, Karen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I've been watching your pool," she announced, as if she had been conducting some kind of surveillance operation. "And I've noticed the water has been looking off." I raised an eyebrow. "Off?" "Yes. It has a suspicious shimmer to it. Could be chemical imbalances, algae growth, or worse, unsafe conditions that could affect the neighborhood." I blinked, wondering if I had heard her correctly. "Karen, my pool is fine. I clean it regularly, test the chemicals myself. Everything's balanced." She pursed her lips. "And I'm just supposed to take your word for it?" I sighed, already regretting engaging in the conversation. "Yes, because it's my pool, on my property." Karen, of course, wasn't satisfied with that answer. Instead, she whipped out a small clipboard from under her arm. Where she had been hiding it, I had no idea, but it was covered in notes, printed articles, and what looked like an official-looking form that was probably something she printed off the internet. "I've been doing some research," she continued, tapping a pen against the paper. "Pool contamination can lead to serious health issues. I read a study about an entire community getting sick because of improper chlorine levels. I take this very seriously." I had to bite back a laugh. "Karen, do you think I'm poisoning people with my pool?" "I don't know what's going on in that water," she said with an air of self-importance, "but I intend to find out." Before I could react, she actually stepped toward my backyard gate, reaching for the latch. My patience ran out. "Karen, stop! You are not coming into my yard." She recoiled, her face twisting with outrage. "I have a right to check if there's a health hazard." "No, you don't." I folded my arms. "You're not a health inspector, and you have zero authority over my pool." She huffed, her face turning red. "Fine, then I'll have to take matters into my own hands." I should have seen it coming. The dramatic sigh, the way she reached for her phone, classic Karen behavior. But even I was stunned when she dialed 911 right in front of me. "I'd like to report a possible public health emergency," she said, glaring at me like I was a fugitive. That's when I knew this was about to get ridiculous. 15 minutes later, I heard the sound of tires rolling up my driveway. I set my drink down on the patio table and turned just in time to see a police cruiser come to a stop. The flashing lights weren't on, but the sight of an officer stepping out of the car was enough to make my stomach sink. This was really happening. Karen, who had been standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed like she was about to receive a medal for public service, immediately sprang into action. She marched up to the officer before he even had a chance to shut his car door, pointing aggressively at my pool. "There he is! That's him!" she announced, her voice carrying through the yard. "I told you, officer, he's refusing to let me test his water, and I have reason to believe it's a public health concern." The officer, mid-40s, short-cropped hair, and looking about as interested in this situation as someone watching paint dry, let out a long sigh. He adjusted his belt, clearly already regretting whatever shift had landed him this call. He turned to me. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on here?" I took a deep breath. "Yeah, my neighbor here decided she wants to test my pool water, and when I told her no, because you know it's my pool, she called you." Karen let out an exaggerated gasp. "I called because I am concerned for the safety of the community," she said dramatically. "What if his chlorine levels are too high? What if there's bacteria? What if—" The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, do you have any reason to believe his pool is in actual danger? Like, have you seen anyone get sick? Smelled anything unusual?" Karen faltered for a split second, but then she doubled down. I saw something in the water. A strange shimmer. It didn't look natural. It could be a dangerous chemical reaction. I couldn't help but laugh. Karen, it's called sunlight. The officer pressed his lips together like he was holding back from rolling his eyes. Sir, he said to me, do you mind if I just take a quick look? Just to say I did? I shrugged. Be my guest. I led him to the edge of the pool where the water was crystal clear and blue. He crouched down, looked at the water, then glanced back at Karen. Ma'am, it looks fine to me. Karen wasn't having it. You're not a health inspector, she shot back. You're a police officer. We need a professional to analyze it. The officer turned back to me. Would you be willing to have it tested just to settle this? I could have said no. I could have made a big deal about it, but I knew Karen wouldn't let this go. So I shrugged. Sure, call whoever you want. Karen smirked, thinking she had won. The officer sighed, already pulling out his radio. I leaned back against my patio chair, sipping my drink. If Karen wanted to waste her time, I was more than happy to let her. I had a feeling this was about to get even more ridiculous. It didn't take long for the health inspector to arrive. About 20 minutes after the officer radioed it in, a white van with an official-looking logo pulled up in front of my house. Karen stood on the sidewalk, practically vibrating with self-righteous energy while I leaned back in my patio chair, watching the scene unfold like a live-action episode of Neighborhood Karens Gone Wild. The inspector stepped out, a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a testing kit. He looked professional but also slightly irritated, probably because he knew exactly what kind of nonsense call this was. He adjusted his glasses and walked up to the officer. So, what are we looking at here? The inspector asked. The officer sighed and gestured toward my pool. This lady, he nodded toward Karen, believes the water is a health hazard and insisted we get it tested. The inspector glanced at Karen, then at me. And you're the owner of the pool? I nodded. Yep, and the water's fine, but she seems convinced I'm running some kind of chemical warfare experiment back here. Karen gasped. I never said that. The inspector cut her off with a polite but firm nod. All right, let's get a sample and clear this up. He knelt by the pool, pulled out a sterile vial, and dipped it into the water. He swirled it around, checking the clarity. Then he pulled out a small digital testing device and began running an analysis. Karen stood there with her arms crossed, a smug smile creeping onto her face as if she had just cracked some major crime. A few moments passed in silence. The inspector examined his device, nodded, and made a few notes on his clipboard. Then he looked up at me. Well, I've got some results, he said. Karen stepped forward eagerly. And what did I tell you? What's in there? The inspector glanced at her, then back at me. Your pool water is actually in perfect condition. Chlorine levels are balanced, pH is ideal, and there are no contaminants. Honestly, this water is probably cleaner than most tap water. I smirked, watching Karen's expression crumble in real time. So, just to be clear, I said, there's nothing dangerous about my pool? Not at all, the inspector confirmed. You're maintaining it better than most people do. Karen's face turned an unnatural shade of red. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. She looked like a fish gasping for air. That can't be right, she sputtered. Did you check everything? What about hidden chemicals? The inspector gave her a flat look. Ma'am, I checked for everything I needed to. There's nothing wrong with this pool. I couldn't help but chuckle. So does that mean I'm not poisoning the neighborhood? The officer let out a quiet sigh of relief, probably grateful that this nonsense was finally over. But Karen wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. She clenched her fists. I know I saw something suspicious in that water. Maybe he tampered with it before you got here. The inspector actually laughed. Ma'am, do you really think he ran out here with a full chemistry set in the last 20 minutes just to alter the water? Karen's jaw tightened, but she had no response. She had been so sure she was about to catch me in some grand conspiracy, and now she was grasping at straws. The officer turned to me. Sorry for the trouble, sir. Looks like you're all good here. I nodded. No worries. It was entertaining at least. But just as I thought it was all over, Karen did something that made everything 10 times worse. Karen's face was a deep shade of red. Her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might break a tooth. The way she was standing, fists balled at her sides, it was clear she wasn't about to let this go. She had just dragged the police and a health inspector to my house, convinced she was about to expose me as some kind of backyard biohazard, only to be told she was completely, embarrassingly wrong. But Karen being Karen, she wasn't about to accept reality. "This isn't over," she snapped, jabbing a finger toward my pool like it had personally offended her. "There has to be something you missed." The health inspector chuckled and shook his head. "Ma'am, I tested for everything relevant. The water is perfectly safe." Karen wasn't listening. She turned to the officer, desperation creeping into her voice. "He could have tampered with the water before you got here. Maybe he drained it and refilled it real quick to hide the contamination." I blinked. "Karen, do you hear yourself? You think I drained an entire pool in 20 minutes? With what, a giant sponge?" The officer sighed, clearly reaching his limit. "Ma'am, this is getting out of hand. There's no crime here, no health violation, and no reason for law enforcement to be involved. You've wasted enough of our time." Karen gasped like he had just slapped her. "Wasted? Wasted! I am trying to protect this neighborhood." The officer rubbed his temple. "Ma'am, at this point, you're just causing unnecessary trouble. If you don't leave this man alone, I'll have to cite you for filing a false report." Karen's mouth fell open. "You're threatening me?" "I'm giving you a warning," he clarified. "Now, I suggest you go home." But Karen wasn't known for backing down. Instead of walking away, she turned to me with a glare so intense it would have set my pool on fire if looks could kill. "You think this is funny?" she hissed. "You think you won?" I shrugged. "Kinda, yeah." That was it. That was the final straw. Karen let out an angry growl, turned on her heel, and stormed off. But in her fury, she didn't notice the garden hose stretched across the patio. Before I could even process what was happening, her foot caught, her balance wobbled, and in one of the most dramatic slow-motion moments I had ever witnessed, she tumbled forward. With a loud splash, Karen landed right in my pool. There was a beat of silence, a glorious, perfect beat of silence. Then, flailing wildly, she shrieked, "I'm being poisoned!" I doubled over laughing. The officer turned away, biting his lip, his shoulders shaking like he was holding back laughter himself. Even the health inspector let out a quiet chuckle. Karen thrashed in the water, eyes wide in panic. "I can feel it, the chemicals! I'm burning!" The health inspector crouched at the pool's edge, completely unfazed. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "it's chlorine. The same thing in every properly maintained swimming pool. You'll be just fine." But Karen wasn't having it. She paddled toward the edge, splashing dramatically, as if she were escaping some toxic wasteland. When she finally reached the steps and hauled herself out, she was dripping wet, furious, and looking about as far from in control as she ever had. The officer, now struggling to maintain his composure, took out his ticket book. "Ma'am, for wasting emergency resources, I'm issuing you a citation." Karen gasped. "This is harassment." "No, ma'am," the officer said, tearing off the ticket and handing it to her. "This is consequences." Sopping wet and humiliated, Karen snatched the ticket, shot me one last look of pure hatred, and stormed off, leaving behind a trail of chlorinated water in her wake. I leaned back in my chair, smiling as I sipped my drink. Justice had never tasted so sweet. Karen stormed off, her soaked clothes clinging to her like a second skin, her shoes squelching with every furious step. She didn't even bother looking back as she stomped down the sidewalk, dripping chlorinated water along the way. The officer and the health inspector watched her go, shaking their heads. "Well," the inspector said, closing his kit, "I'd say that wraps things up." I smirked. Yep, a clean bill of health for my pool and a well-deserved bath for Karen. Not a bad day. The officer let out a short chuckle as he tucked his citation book back into his pocket. "I've seen a lot of ridiculous 911 calls, but this one's going on my list of favorites." He adjusted his belt and gave me a nod. "Sorry to bother you, but you know how it is. We have to check things out, even when they're absurd." "No worries," I said, waving a hand. "Honestly, I appreciate you keeping a straight face through all of that." The officer smirked. "Oh, trust me, it wasn't easy." He glanced toward his patrol car. "All right, I think we're done here. Just good luck with your neighbor." I laughed. "Thanks, I'm gonna need it." With that, he and the inspector headed off, leaving me alone with the aftermath of what was easily the most entertaining thing to happen in my backyard in a long time. I looked at the pool, the last few ripples from Karen's unplanned dive fading away. The scene was almost peaceful now. Almost. Then, as if on cue, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door slamming across the street. I turned my head just in time to see Karen standing on her porch, arms crossed, her wet hair plastered to her forehead. Even from a distance, I could see the pure hatred burning in her eyes. I raised my drink in a mock toast. She responded by slamming her front door so hard that a nearby bird took off in panic. Grinning, I leaned back in my chair, basking in the afternoon sun. For the next hour, I enjoyed my pool the way it was meant to be enjoyed, without Karen's interference. The water was perfect, the air was warm, and for once, the neighborhood drama had worked entirely in my favor. But of course, I knew Karen well enough to realize that she wasn't going to let this go. Sure enough, the next day, I woke up to find a furious post on the neighborhood Facebook group. "Urgent community warning," it read. "Yesterday, I was brutalized and humiliated simply for trying to protect our neighborhood from potential hazards. Certain people, you know who you are putting us all at risk with unchecked chemical exposure. This is not over. We deserve safe water." The comment section was a mix of confused neighbors, people who knew Karen too well to take her seriously, and a few who were clearly just there for the drama. Someone replied, "Didn't you fall into his pool?" Another commented, "Maybe stay out of his yard next time?" A third wrote, "Pretty sure his pool is fine. The real hazard seems to be your temper." By the time I finished my morning coffee, the post had been flooded with laughing emojis, and Karen had deleted it in embarrassment. I considered responding, but honestly, there was no need. She had already done all the damage to herself. With a satisfied sigh, I set my phone down, stretched, and headed out to my backyard, ready to enjoy another peaceful, Karen-free swim.